Hello folks, this is David Hurley of davidhurley.net and elitedownlinebuilder.com, and I should mention easychesstips.com. Now I've just got back home. It's about 11:30 in the evening from teaching a private class. I teach a doctor. We usually read some literature. We're reading through George Orwell's 1984, and then after we've done that we play a game of chess. And so when I get home, I like to look at the game we've played. I take notes of the game. And then when I come home, I put the game into the Lichess chess machine to have a look at it to see where either of us went wrong and how we can improve. And then I put the game up on YouTube on my non-business channel, where I put a lot of chess videos, and I send it out to my student. And so this is how the game went tonight. This is tonight's 2020 Vision Challenge as set up by Pixie Post. We're not doing any heavy physical lifting tonight, but we're going to do a bit of mental training. So I'm just going to go quickly through the game. I'm black. My opponent was white and opened with e4. That is the king's pawn coming out here. And so this is how things developed. I respond with one of my two standard openings against white with pawn to d6. We then have the queen pawn comes out. I bring out my king's knight. The queen's knight comes out. So we're all looking to control the central area of the board, very important part of chess. So I bring out my king's pawn to e4. And you can see that Lichess, we can set how many lines Lichess is going to recommend to us. And Lichess is recommending these two standard moves. And my opponent did that one, developing a knight, in which case I indeed took the pawn. And my opponent takes back with his knight. So it's all fairly equal. White begins with a slight advantage because white has the first move. I then develop my bishop, and we do have a bishop development by white, but it's the opposite bishop to c4, the white squared bishop. I bring out my knight, but I bring it out to d7. The queen develops, but this is a mistake. I think a small mistake. You can see that black suddenly has a bit of an advantage. I develop my knight, or rather I attack the queen with my knight, but I'm also attacking the bishop here. It's a nice forking attack. And so the queen has to move again, which is a loss of tempo. And then when I take the knight, the queen has to move again. That's 3 moves of the queen, which means nothing else is being developed. So it gives black a slight edge in this part of the game. I then indeed develop my c pawn, and the knight comes over to f5. And I indeed take the knight to pull that central pawn away from the center. And so I retain this small but significant advantage. I castle, my opponent castles, and I advance that pawn, and the queen retreats. This little move here is to keep this knight away from this square here. And indeed, my opponent comes down to attack my knight. I advance my pawn, trying to take control in the center. We have this exchange here, which I'm quite happy with. We're back to equality, but that's okay for black. The rook comes out. My rook attacks his queen up this line. The queen moves over there. The queen is, by the way, attacking this weak pawn, which is why I move my rook across. He attacks my bishop with his knight. I don't move the bishop. Instead, I bring I'm quite pleased with this move. It's not one which Lichess is looking at, but I've set Lichess to look at just 2 moves, to show me just 2 possible moves. Anyway, we're still dead even at this stage. Now, the knight retreat means it's a bit of a loss of control over the center. It's an understandable defensive move, but maybe not the best. Lichess is recommending an advance of the pawn or bring the rook into the center. Anyway, the knight retreats, and I decide to have a bit of a pawn storm. I have 4 pawns to his 3 on this side of the board, so I begin a pawn storm, but it doesn't go anywhere because the game develops in another way. With this advance of the knight, looking to attack the bishop and also this pawn here in front of the king, so I've got to go careful. I move my queen up, so this row here is very important, but the queen also has another duty, defending this bishop, looking out over here at this pawn. So placing the queen was quite an important part of this game. Now you see the queen and the knight are attacking this pawn. So this pawn, if this knight takes the bishop and says check, this pawn cannot take back, which is why the pawn cannot take back, because the queen is pinning the pawn to the king, which is why it was important to keep my queen over here. So how do I respond? Indeed, I've now got this very nice strong position here. And why did my opponent attack this pawn when it looks quite simply as if I can take his pawn with my pawn? But it's because if I do that, let's have a look. This rook can simply take the now undefended pawn here. So it was quite a clever little move, and I managed to see it. And okay, this is my move. Now, this move is actually a very bad move. It looks threatening. My chess, I go by the nickname or the Twitter handle of Pub Chess Bluffer when I'm in chess mode and not in online business mode. And I enjoy playing social chess in a pub or a bar scene, drinking beer, socializing and playing chess. That's my favorite way of playing chess. And in those kind of environments, or playing basically at our kind of level, sometimes a move which is actually a pretty bad move, because it looks threatening, it induces a mistake. And that's what happened here. I was actually very lucky because my opponent did not notice how bad this move is, because it looks threatening. So instead of taking this undefended pawn here, or instead of taking this undefended pawn here, I aggressively charge up, and you can see here the advantage bar disappears. It's actually a losing move because that rook move. Well, the rook did not take the pawn and add extra defense down here. Instead, it opens the way for this knight to take and check the king. And remember, this pawn cannot take, so now it pulls my queen off of this row here, which means now the rooks are free to take. And if I take back, I'll take back to show you. I'm now suddenly losing this game. My opponent has a rook advantage and also is threatening checkmate on the back row. So it was actually a very bad move, but the good news is we play with chess clocks with just 30 minutes each on the clock and no increment. So the time is going down, down, down all the time. So at this stage in the game, we had maybe 8 minutes left on the clock, something like that. So not too much thinking time. This looks like a very threatening move, and it induced, luckily for me, a mistake. My opponent, look at that, my opponent felt he needed an air hole for the king, and so he moved his pawn, which instantly restores the advantage to me. So I've got through the crisis. The Pub Chess Bluffer's bluff has paid off. Well, I'm calling it a bluff now, but I don't think I actually played it as a bluff at the time. Anyway, the bluff has worked, the pseudo bluff, the blunder, which I'm pretending is a bluff. And so now I'm free to take the rook. And now on that rook exchange, I have a secure advantage. And indeed, I move my queen up to attack the king. I've still got to be very careful down here. If I relax for a moment, this knight can now whip in and attack this bishop. Just simply take the bishop because the pawn cannot take back. The queen has moved away from guarding the bishop, so I've got to go careful. The king moves into the corner, and indeed, Lichess is recommending to bring the queen back as cover. I do that, but to one square down, I'm quite happy to exchange off queens, because I think I have a positional advantage on the board. My opponent finally takes that bishop with his knight, but it's too late. I take back, so I preserve my pawn structure in front of the king, and I think I have a better position here. My opponent attempts to break through, looking to get this pawn down here where he can promote it to a queen, but it's a bit too late, because I can take some, I think my opponent, he missed a trick here. He should have taken this pawn to double up over here. That would have been a much better move. What happens if he does that? I still retain an advantage, but it's a bit more difficult for me. I mean, I can gobble up this pawn here, but it makes life a bit more difficult for me with only a few minutes on the clock. But my opponent didn't do that. He retreated his rook, or moved his rook in front of next to the king to defend it, and enabling me to get my pawn up the board to threaten to promote. Excuse me. I was expecting my opponent to also build some momentum for his pawn, but he did. He went on a pawn grabbing spree, so I was able to gobble up that pawn. And he opens an air hole for the king, but now it's kind of too late. This is now very strong, as you can see, a very strong position for me. He has to stop the pawn, but again, it's too late. Even though the king could be checkmated on the back row, could be trapped by its own pawns, it doesn't really matter, because I've got in. I'm able to attack the king now. He has to take back. I promote, and the king has nowhere to go. Now, the next move, I missed this move. This is checkmate next go. Let's do the big one. This one is more fun, because the queen here is actually protecting the king. If this queen gets a chance to check, the queen can come down here and protect the king. So it's kind of, there's a bit more of a flourish to go to checkmate with this queen. We don't need the queen to defend the black row, because she finishes off the king. The king, this is checkmate. The king cannot move to this air hole because the second queen is covering. So that would have been a very nice finish. I have a pretty poor record of missing. I quite often miss these nice flourishing checkmate endings. The game, however, ended a couple of moves later with a slower checkmate, but checkmate is checkmate. There were still about 4 minutes or so on the clock when the game finished. So it's a nice little win for me. A bit of mental exercise for the 2020 Vision Challenge. And so I think I've killed 2 birds with 1 stone tonight by coming back here and talking about chess for the 2020 Vision Challenge. And I will also send this video to my student. So that's all from me, David Hurley of EliteDownlineBuilder.com, DavidHurley.net and EasyChessTips.com, until the next 2020 Vision Challenge. Go away.